Afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, a community conversation about the drug development process. My name is Amelia Robert, and I've been a member of the NORD staff for 3 years, working previously with NORD's research department, and now as a member of the membership team. In both roles, it has been my pleasure to work closely with patient organizations across the rare disease spectrum to help them provide optimal service to their communities. Thank you for joining us today for this community conversation on a topic of great importance to everyone affected by a rare disease: how potential new treatments are developed and reviewed. This topic came to our attention in part because NORD is a partner with an FDA-funded initiative known as the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator-Data and Analytics Platform, or RDCA-DAP. In that initiative, we work with the FDA and the Critical Path Institute, or CPATH, to encourage systematic collection, analysis, and sharing of data to encourage and support research. As we've worked on this initiative, it became apparent to us that it would be really helpful to provide some basic education and information about research and drug development, and how patient organizations can get involved. Our speakers today represent 3 distinct and important perspectives on that topic. Loretta Byrne, Master's of Nursing, is a research services educator at Vanderbilt University and a project manager for Research Match, an NIH-funded initiative to match patients with researchers. Dr. Carrie Jo Lee is Associate Director for Rare Diseases at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. Chandra Clark, Master's of Education, is Executive Director of the VHL Alliance, a patient organization for individuals affected by von Hippel-Lindau disease. Loretta will provide basic information and answer questions on research. Carrie Jo will provide basic information about drug development and how FDA reviews potential new products. And Chandra will talk about her organization's experiences in research and, potentially, the development of treatments for von Hippel-Lindau disease. We've asked each of our panelists to provide some brief introductory information, and then we'll go to discussion. Many people shared questions at the time they registered for this webinar, and we'll address those as we have time. We also invite everyone who is in the audience for this live presentation today to submit questions through the webinar platform's Q&A function at any time. We'll answer as many of these questions as possible. Before we get started, just a brief word about NORD. For nearly 40 years, NORD has led the fight to improve the lives of those with rare diseases. We do this through education, research, advocacy, and patient services. To learn more about NORD or to access our resources and events, please visit our website at rarediseases.org. You can also follow NORD on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. This webinar is being recorded. We will make it available to all registrants in the next few weeks. At that time, please feel free to share with anyone who wasn't able to join us today. This is an important topic, and our hope is to include as many viewpoints as possible in this ongoing conversation. Now let's get started, and to set the stage, let's take a few minutes to view a brief video NORD recently created on the 5 steps to drug development.
The 5 steps in the drug development process. There are 5 steps in the drug development process that, together, are designed to help ensure that potential new therapies are both safe and effective. Step number 1, discovery and development. Discovery is the exploratory phase where researchers are focused on understanding all of the ways that a rare disease affects patients and what potential approaches may stop, slow, or reverse the effects of a condition. Once a promising treatment option is found, researchers conduct experiments to find out how a therapy may work and how it might interact with other compounds in the human body. This is called development. Step number 2, preclinical research. During this phase, studies are conducted in the laboratory and in animals to focus on the most promising treatment candidates and delivery methods, determine whether they can safely be tested in humans, and establish an initial dosing level for clinical trials. This phase lays the groundwork for clinical trials that are most likely to bring patients the right drug in the right way in the right amount. Preclinical testing must follow specific processes and meet defined standards. Before beginning clinical research, drug developers must submit an investigational new drug (IND) application to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) that includes all of this data to support starting a clinical trial. The IND must be reviewed and approved by FDA prior to any clinical research being initiated. Step number 3, clinical research. Clinical research refers to studies that involve testing treatments to determine their safety and effectiveness in humans. Researchers design clinical trials to answer specific research questions, with trials following a study plan called a protocol. FDA conducts ongoing reviews of the data to check that safety standards are met and benefit is likely before clinical trials are able to move from small-scale pilot studies to larger studies with more participants. Step number 4, FDA review. To start the review of a proposed new therapy, a drug developer submits a new drug application, NDA, or a biologics license application, BLA, depending on the type of treatment. FDA review teams examine all of the data collected from the start of preclinical research through completed clinical trials and make a decision to approve or not to approve the drug for a proposed population, depending on the benefits and risks of the therapy. In some cases, a decision can be made from the data submitted in the NDA or BLA, and in other cases, FDA may seek additional clarification on the data or input from an advisory committee. These committees include independent medical experts and patient representatives who can speak to the patient population's perspective on risk and benefit. Step number 5, post-market safety monitoring. After a new product is approved and available to the public, FDA continues to monitor it for any safety issues that might become apparent over time. This ongoing surveillance includes routine inspections of drug manufacturing facilities and programs that allow manufacturers, medical professionals, and consumers to track and report safety concerns about approved drugs. If new safety concerns are detected, FDA may require changes to the drug label to inform doctors and patients, and/or require that the drug be removed from the market. These are the 5 steps of drug development, and while this may seem like a long process, each step is important in order to protect the health and safety of all of us.
Thank you all for watching. I hope you found the video informative. Some viewers may already know that this video was created as part of the project I mentioned at the top of today's webinar, the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics Platform, or RDCA-DAP. This platform will promote the sharing of patient-level data from a variety of data holders in the rare disease space, resulting in a fuller understanding of a rare disease. If we can bring together data on the lived experience of rare disease patients and clinical data, we can pave a path to new treatments and improve our understanding of the progression of a disease. This would accelerate clinical development, make it less expensive, and encourage new companies to develop rare disease drugs. If you'd like to learn more about sharing data with the RDCA-DAP, please visit rarediseases.org/RDCA-DAP. This link will be included on the resource sheet we'll distribute after the webinar. Now, I'd like to invite all 3 of our speakers to present their opening remarks. Loretta, we'll start with you.
Hi, Amelia. Nice to meet you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. I'm Loretta Byrne, and I have been a nurse my whole career. I started off in oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Then I became a research nurse specialist in clinical pharmacology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in 2003, and I did that for 12 years. And now I have the pleasure of being a research subject advocate, a participant advocate. I advocate for research in general. I'm a recruitment specialist, and I project manage Trials Today and Research Match at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Trials Today and Research Match are two projects funded by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, to help patients and the publics get connected with researchers in the United States. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this today. I hope I can share information on what it's like to be in a study. And I'm very honored to be here with my new colleagues from the FDA and the VHL Alliance. Vanderbilt University Medical Center and the Trials Today and Research Match teams also love being collaborators with NORD. We learn a lot from you. We recently hosted you on one of our webinars. We love sharing resources with you. And we're also partners and collaborators with other nonprofit organizations so that we can amplify your voices and provide information and resources to the people who volunteer in Research Match. So as we talk about research today, I loved this video because I did want to stress a few things, that there are federal regulations and laws that govern and oversee what we do as researchers, and that studies have a good deal of complexity. But that's because creating a new drug that's known to be safe and effective often involves several phases of studies and several people taking part in those studies. But those are two aspects of drug development that are very difficult with rare diseases, right? So still, rare disease research has a lot in common with disease and with research on common health conditions. So as we talk about participating in research, keep those things in mind. Understand that studies sometimes offer treatment, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's no direct benefit to you for being in a study because that new drug or device is still under investigation and they don't know if it's effective. So overall, I'd like to absolutely stress that the volunteer is the most important part of research and that your well-being is of the utmost importance during a research study. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Loretta. Now let's move on to Chandra.
Hello, Amelia, and I want to say hello to everyone in the audience. I'm so excited to be here today and want to thank NORD for the invitation. I'm Chandra Clark. I am the Executive Director of the VHL Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization. We are very patient-centered in all that we do. We've been in existence for almost 30 years, so we will celebrate our 30-year anniversary in 2023. On a personal note, as an executive director, I've been in nonprofit leadership for almost 18 years. However, I've had the honor and the privilege in serving as the leader of the VHL Alliance for nearly the past 2 years. And in joining the organization, I joined us at a very exciting time as we passed the finish line of the first FDA-approved drug for VHL patients called Welireg. The VHL Alliance, again, we are very patient-centered. Our mission is really focused on improving the quality of life for VHL patients, families, and caregivers. It is our commitment to connect our patients and our families and their caregivers to excellent treatment options, providing them with education and awareness, but also we are supporters of medical research. And so today I'll have the opportunity to really share more about the patient organization's responsibility and really being that advocate and that proponent of feeling the need for medical research while, number one, your focus and commitment is to your patients. And so I want to thank NORD for being a great partner of the VHL Alliance. We also partner with NORD for our patient registry, which is My VHL, and I'll talk about that later. But most importantly, in all that we do in rare disease, we know that it is about improving the quality of life for our patients. So I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much. We're excited to have you here. And last, we'll hear from Carrie Jo.
Thank you so much for having me here, Amelia. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. My name is Dr. Carrie Jo Lee. I am the Associate Director for Rare Diseases in the Office of New Drugs in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, one of the 3 medical product centers at the FDA. In my current role, I lead the Rare Diseases team in the Division of Rare Diseases and Medical Genetics, and we are a programming and policy team whose mission is to facilitate, support, and accelerate the development of drugs and therapeutic biologics for rare diseases. I myself am a pediatric gastroenterologist and hepatologist, and I have a very special place in my heart for patients, particularly pediatric patients with rare diseases. I took care of many of them in my training at the NYU School of Medicine, Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and Children's Hospital New York at Columbia. So I am very excited to be here. One of the other functions that my team performs is actually the program management for CDER's new Accelerating Rare Disease Cures program, which we are also very excited about at CDER. And our vision is very aligned with the mission of my own team. We are hoping to speed and increase the development of effective and safe treatment options to address the unmet needs of patients. We're front and center of our vision with rare diseases. And we're hoping from our end and our perspective to really help drive the scientific and the regulatory conversation surrounding innovation and engagement about rare disease drug development. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having me and looking forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you to Loretta, Carrie Jo, and Chandra. Now I'm excited to begin the Q&A portion of our webinar. And I will start with a question for Loretta. Loretta, how can patients or caregivers find out if anyone is doing research on their disease?
That's a great question. Well, let's see. There is a lot of information on the web, and that's a good thing, but I also think it can get a little bit confusing. So when I think about that question, I think I'd recommend starting with websites from trusted groups like the National Institutes of Health, which is also known as the NIH, and the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATS. And not-for-profit patient organizations and advocacy organizations like NORD. These organizations are seeking to fund and find new evidence-based science. So to actively search for studies, you could try going to trialstoday.org or clinicaltrials.gov. And I would recommend going to NORD and becoming involved in rare disease patient advocacy organizations because they can support you in other ways. So on trialstoday.org, you'll answer a question about why you want to take part in research, like what's driving you. Maybe there are no other treatments for you. Or you've exhausted your current treatment and you're looking for something new. You're willing to be involved in something experimental. You answer your question based on your comfort level. And then you give some information about yourself and your health condition. And very simply, it takes less than a couple of minutes or less. And then Trials Today will show you the currently recruiting studies going on in the United States that meet your needs. Okay? This is all at no cost. It's offered through Research Match and Trials Today. Now, if you're willing to travel outside of the United States, which is cumbersome and burdensome, but may be necessary for you, you can look at clinicaltrials.gov, for a full list of studies within and outside of the United States. NORD and more specific patient advocacy groups link you to trials on your health condition, and they may be supporting researchers and research studies, and they can offer resources and support you in many ways. So I would definitely check those out. As you join, you might also consider joining, not only looking up where studies are, but joining registries so that researchers can find you. And these can include researchmatch.org and the Rare Diseases Contact Registry, which is RDCRN. And I think these links will be shared with you. And a registry affiliated with a patient organization for your rare disease would be good to join also. You may get involved in a longitudinal study where they're just observing the course of your condition, or you might be able to be connected with a researcher that's doing a clinical trial. And I'm sure they'll be sharing information under that you can find on NORD under Find a Patient Organization. There's a whole list of organizations there, and then you can get connected to their registries through them. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. And now I have a question for Chandra. Chandra, what does your organization do to encourage research on von Hippel-Lindau disease?
So thank you for your question, Amelia. So I broke it down into two different categories. So we foster research and we fund research. So I'll begin with fostering. So we are true advocates and we promote the need for medical research, specifically related to VHL. And so we have had the honor of partnering and having relationships with some of the most brilliant researchers and physicians all over the world. We also have recently participated in district days and partnered with organizations like Kidney Can to really go before members of Congress and advocate for the importance of funding medical research, because we know that in funding medical research, it will lead us to a cure for many rare diseases. And then in the same vein, we fund medical research. So for our organization specifically, we have funded nearly $3 million focused on VHL projects from researchers. So every year we have a specific research grant program. So we encourage researchers to apply and submit projects that are related to VHL. And I am happy to say that a milestone for us has been in 2019, Dr. Kaylin Ratcliffe and Semenza, they won the Nobel laureate for their research related to VHL, which led us to the first FDA-approved drug in 2020. So we know that it is so important to really foster and go before Congress and go out in our community and advocate and support medical institutions and academic institutions, and really also leverage our patients' voice in speaking about the need for research. And then we also know that we have to do all that we can to help fund research. So those are the two areas, if I best describe how we support research.
Excellent. Thank you for your answer. And I actually have another question for you in the same vein. Are there things that you have learned about VHL as a result of your participation in research?
Yeah, so I think the interesting part about research is that you learn something new every day. So I think, if I were to give you kind of the three high-level areas where we've received a lot of information, is one about the manifestations of VHL in the tumors and its impact on the body. And then that leads us to finding out more about how it impacts the quality of life for VHL patients. And then also we've learned about the correlation to VHL, between VHL and other forms of cancer. So that would be kidney, pancreatic, and even breast cancer. So there are things that we're always learning also about how the gene functions, the importance of encouraging genetic counseling. But there are always advancements in medical research. And again, going back to my first answer, it's just so important that we do all that we can to support medical research.
Thank you. And I have a question for Carrie Jo. What do you want patients and caregivers to know about how FDA reviews potential new treatments?
That's a good one, because I often wish that they had a window into how dedicated staff, particularly those working in rare diseases, are in this space. I would want patients and caregivers to know that reviewing potential new treatments is a truly collaborative and multidisciplinary effort. You have a core review team that is involved. You also have additional experts that are dedicated to every aspect of drug review. And as you've seen in the introductory video that was shown, a program is made up of many components that spans a tremendous amount of research and trials data. So we have a multidisciplinary core team of review experts that includes clinicians, statisticians, clinical pharmacologists, non-clinical pharmacologists and toxicologists, as well as manufacturing and quality experts that are reviewing each and every drug. In addition, we often involve other experts, whether they are in the same center. So we may have colleagues in our Division of Clinical Outcome Assessment or epidemiologists at the FDA or other scientific experts within CDER that we involve as needed for particular applications. We additionally collaborate with other medical product centers, such as the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, as well as the Center for Biologics and Biologics Evaluation and Research. So especially when it comes to rare diseases, we often say it really does take a village, and all of us working together in this space are dedicated to working effectively to approve safe and effective drugs for populations with unmet needs. So that's what I would want to share.
Important to know, and I love that idea. It takes a village to develop a rare disease therapy. So I have another question for Loretta. How can patients and caregivers know whether a particular study might be right for them?
Well, that's a great question. It's complicated. I think I would say, can you hear me? Yeah. Yep. Okay. I think I would say, if you want to know if this study is right for you, you need to take a lot of things into consideration. First, you have to get a lot of information, all the information that you can get, and try to get as much information as possible before you actually have to travel. I know that can be difficult for many of you. So before you go into the site, see what information you can learn so that you know whether you'll meet the basic criteria of the study. You wouldn't want to make all the burdensome travel only to find out that you don't qualify. Although sometimes that's not knowable until they run tests, but get some basic information first. When you start a study, you'll meet the principal investigator, or the PI, and that's usually a physician scientist who's well established in his area or her area. And you'll also probably meet a study coordinator who will kind of shepherd you through the whole thing. You may meet study nurses and lab people. Ask questions and don't rely on the consent paperwork that they give you that may not have all of the information, or it's often hard to understand. So the team should provide you with information and encourage you to ask questions. So make sure you understand the purpose of this study. Who's in charge? What are the risks and what are the benefits? Are there any known side effects? Is the drug or device available to you after the study ends? Will you be able to see your own doctor? Or how will you see your own doctor and doctors during the study? Understand if there's a placebo involved in the study, and make sure that they can accommodate somebody like you, and how and what will that look like? So being in a study can actually overlap with your standard care. Ask them to explain what separates standard medical care from the research study. You may be seeing your doctor for one thing, but then you have an additional test. But that's part of the experiment or testing of the drug that you're on. You could be asked to stop the medications that you're currently taking, which can be a big decision on your part. Understand what is experimental. Understand what is being tested. This may be the first time that this drug has been given to a person. You need to know that. You may need to understand what kind of studies have been done or what have been the findings from animal studies, or what other research there has been on the drug, if they can give you some kind of information. Understand if there's been a safe dose established already for the drug, or if that you're in that kind of study. Ask about the phase of the study, and you can find out a lot about phases of trials on the FDA's website. So don't assume that the drug that they're putting you on or the device that they're using is already tested, it's already safe and effective, okay? This is a study that you're in. So there may not be any direct benefit to you. They're still gaining knowledge. Also understand if there are any costs to you, and then talk with your healthcare providers so that they can help you make those decisions, if that helps.
Those are all fantastic points. And I think it's such a great and important point that you raised about asking questions. I know it can be really intimidating, especially if you aren't someone with a medical or a scientific or research background to enter a setting like that, but you have the right to ask questions. And in fact, it's the study staff's job to make sure that you understand what you're getting into and that you're
I suggest bring a list of questions with you, because it can be intimidating once you get there, not necessarily because they're trying to be intimidating, just the whole experience itself.
Absolutely. And are there any aspects of participating in a research study that patients and caregivers might find surprising or unanticipated?
Oh, okay. Well, taking part in research can have some burdens, inconveniences, and risks, but it can also offer some rewards as well, but understand what those might be. There can be significant challenges to participating, especially for people with rare diseases who may be struggling with daily living, let alone getting to a location and following the course of a research study. So don't be surprised by the details that might be involved and what is being asked of you. Understand the time commitment and the traveling, stopping your medication, taking part in testing. You may be surprised that some research teams can help you with the travel and accommodations, and so that might be a help. Again, often people will naturally assume that once they walk into a medical facility and they're seeing a doctor, there's just something about that makes them assume that this is going to be good for them. But understand that in a scientific trial or a clinical research study, they may not know yet. Okay, that's why it's research, because they don't know yet. So understand that you may be contributing to the overall knowledge of this rare disease or the overall understanding of this new drug or device. So there also could be risks that the study team doesn't even know about yet. Some studies may assign a portion of the participants to get a placebo. Ask if there's a placebo in the study. It's very important to prove that a drug is safe and reliable. It's all part of the process, but it won't have any active ingredients in it. And you need to know if you may be randomized, which means that you may be put into one group where you're getting a placebo and not a drug at all. Also know, and don't be surprised, that you have the right to leave a study at any time. Okay, whether it's the last day of that study, you can decide to withdraw. And also, the people in charge can withdraw you. They may say in the middle, this is no longer a good fit for you, and you're at a higher risk than we expected it to be, so we're going to take you out. Getting connected. One great thing that I want to share is that getting connected with researchers who study rare diseases and the institutions that they do that at may be a huge plus for you. It will connect you with people who are thinking about your disease. They may be sharing information around through networks, nationally or internationally. So you may have connections that you didn't already have before.
The connection building aspect of it is so critical in the rare disease space. So thank you for speaking to that, Loretta.
Sure.
And now I have a question for Chandra. What advice would you have for someone from a small or startup patient organization that's just beginning to learn about research and drug development, about the roles that a patient organization can play?
So again, I'll use two categories. So the first would be to listen and learn. And the second would be to connect and collaborate. There is power in taking the time to have conversations with other organizations and medical professionals and, people that may be more seasoned and have more experience in those areas where you want to learn and develop. So it's there. I always tell people it's critical just to take the time to listen and to ask targeted questions and to take the time to observe. But then the other part is that it's imperative that you connect and collaborate. So for example, the VHL Alliance, we are committed to our partnerships. We know that we are truly better together. And we have learned so much through our partnership with Kidney Can and working with Kidney Can through their district days and going, learning more about trends in research. And so that's a critical partnership for us. We've also learned a lot from working with RDLA and other organizations. So at the end of the day, it's about our patients. We know that there are over 7,000 rare diseases. And so we collectively can have a tremendous impact and really transform research if we take the time to connect and collaborate. So just to recap my pieces of advice: listen and learn, connect and collaborate.
And that's catchy and easy to remember. Listen and learn, collect and collaborate. I love that. Carrie Jo, we have a related question for you. What advice would you give to someone living with a rare disease that has no approved treatment regarding how patient advocates might help encourage research and development of a treatment?
Thanks for that. This is a really important question because unfortunately there are many of you. I think that I'm grateful to hear that my response, I think, to this would really echo what I've been hearing from my colleagues. So it's a challenging question in one aspect because there's approximately 7,000 rare diseases, and every one of these has a very unique set of characteristics and situations that could contribute to sort of how you would answer this specifically. But I would say from my perspective broadly, in the preclinical space especially, so you have no approved treatment, as a patient advocate, you are stronger together. Find partners in other patients, patient groups that may be more seasoned than you are, especially your clinicians, your academic researchers who are dedicated to helping to achieve, the goal of better science to potentially contribute to a treatment for your condition. And also scientific organizations. So partnerships covering multiple perspectives and with multiple solutions for how to address these challenges are really, really valuable in rare disease drug development. Additionally, I would add that if your condition is not well defined, which can frequently be the case, so not a well-known or constant disease course, outcomes, pathogenesis, all of those things are challenges to designing rigorous clinical trials. And I would just offer that there is a wealth of information from the FDA regarding patient-focused drug development. We have a series of guidances in that area, as well as guidances on how to design and use natural history. So we have a draft guidance in rare diseases called Natural History Studies for Drug Development that can be really informative for how to sort of help patients fill that gap of trying to learn more about conditions. There's also a recent real-world data, real-world evidence draft guidance on registries called Real-World Data Assessing Registries to Support Regulatory Decision-Making for Drug and Biological Products. That's a guidance for industry. It says guidance for industry, but really it's for anyone to read. I would encourage patients to learn as much as they can about the fundamental principles of drug development and aspects of drug development that you can help to inform early in development programs so that they can be rigorous and best address your needs.
Thank you. And sort of branching off of that, do you feel that the role of patients and patient organizations in research and drug development has changed in recent years?
Yeah, I definitely think that it has. I think that patients are increasingly recognized by all stakeholders as experts as part of the process and what it's like to live with their conditions. And if you look at the life cycle of drug development, there are many aspects in which patient input should be sought early in the process. For example, drug discovery, identifying what are the unmet needs of the patient so that you're developing therapies that can actually address those unmet needs. Assessing benefits, so what clinical outcomes are meaningful to patients? What is a meaningful clinical benefit? If there is a clinical outcome assessment, which is a type of instrument that can measure benefit, patients provide a tremendous amount of robust input into developing those on your symptoms or other aspects of your experience with the condition. And there's a lot of best practices for collecting this type of information from patients. And again, I'll reference that patient-focused drug development series of guidances, the most recent of which was just published in June 2022. And that one is FDA's Patient-Focused Drug Development Guidance Series for enhancing the incorporation of the patient's voice in medical product development and regulatory decision-making. I mean, it's a really great guidance for how patient input can be directly translated into the drug development process. And even at the FDA, we have entire programs and offices dedicated to hearing from the patient voice. So this includes patient listening sessions. So these are sessions are like a resource for medical product centers for how we can engage with patients and their advocates. And the Office of Commissioner Patient Affairs staff puts on some of those if the listening session spans multiple product centers. Also within CEDAR, there's an Office of Communications, there's a Professional Affairs and Stakeholders group, and they hold the patient listening sessions that are more specific to the product center of CEDAR. And then there's additionally a patient-focused drug development staff within the office of our center director, and they are the ones who lead the series of patient-focused drug development guidances that you've seen come out, and they are dedicated to providing patient-focused drug development meetings, which is where you can really delve into how to incorporate patient experience, perspective, needs, and priorities into the drug development programs that are going on. So I think that with all of these programs and materials that are dedicated to sort of providing mechanisms for the patient voice and experience to our staff, I think we've really come a long way.
And Chandra, I could see you nodding along with some of what Carrie Jo was saying. So I actually have a question for the both of you. And Chandra, we'll have you go first. How important is it for a patient organization to have a patient registry?
It's very important because we know that, in our promoting research that we have to also help support the collection of the data. And so I believe that it's critically important because that's the only way that we can advance that's the only way that we can advance and truly move forward in research. So I was smiling on the inside and outside as Carrie gave her response, but we are at this very critical place in time where patients are more educated now than ever. And we also know from a patient organization perspective that it's also critically important that we promote the equity in clinical trials, right? Because we want to make sure that there's adequate representation of all patients that are participating in clinical trials. And so that is also a key element of why it's important to have a patient registry. Because we know that if we really wanted to advance towards a cure, we want to encourage all of our patients to be able to feel that trust and safety in sharing their information. And then therefore we are also promoting research.
And then I will just, I'll add on to that. It's very important, particularly as I was saying in some of these less well-defined conditions, registries or natural history studies or these sort of sources of repository information is really critical to inform drug development. I mean, that is how we use them to select endpoints, we use them to inform durations of trials, and sort of all of those types of things, to learn how heterogeneous the presentation of a disease is, to learn which patient subpopulations you might include. And the only thing I would also point out is, although they are important, you really have to think from the beginning about what are you going to do with the information so that you collect the correct information. Start with the end in mind, is what I always say. And then as part of the real world data, real world evidence guidance series at the FDA, which you can look up, you'll see there's a lot of considerations for rigorously collecting real world data and that type of information. And I would just say that is just as important. Collecting it in a manner in which you can trust the data and validate the data, and that its data integrity is not compromised, is just as important as all of the uses that you can get out of it.
Thank you. And now I have some questions from our webinar attendees that I'd like to put to the full panel. So first, I'd love to have all of you speak to something that I think gets to the heart of a lot of the questions that people often ask NORD. Why is it so difficult to develop therapies for rare diseases?
So I actually want to start first, just from a different perspective. So I shared a little bit earlier about me being new to rare disease, so being in this place for 2 years. And I think a simple answer would be because there a lot of times is a lack of information. Like when you don't have the information and you don't understand the importance, then it makes it difficult. And so that's why I wanted to go first, because that's just a very basic answer. But I am a proponent that when there is proper education and then there is proper access, that leads to opportunities. And that will help to alleviate the difficulties. And so that, in essence, goes back to how are we elevating the patient's voice? How are we collaborating with other and partnering with other people who can really are on the forefront, right? Because I think sometimes we're intimidated. And so we don't understand that there are people that are on the forefront that can advocate for us if we feel like we cannot advocate for ourselves. So again, communication, collaboration, but I think education, that will help to alleviate the difficulty. And I want to turn it back to my colleague.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to go next, unless Loretta, okay. From the regulatory perspective, it's many of the things that I sort of identified before. It is very difficult to design a very rigorous clinical trial when the condition is not very well defined, or when there is substantial, what we call genotypic or phenotypic heterogeneity. So different people progress at different rates, different people have different clinical manifestations of symptoms related to the disease, and we don't have a way to predict sort of who's going to do what. Waxing and waning of a disease, where it's not just a steady and predictable rate of progression, but something that sort of ebbs and flows over time. The natural history of sort of each of these subtypes could be really poorly understood or inadequately characterized. And another reason it's very, very challenging is that the design of drug development programs really benefits when there is strong foundational scientific sort of definitions about the pathogenesis of the disease or the molecular mechanisms of the disease. And this, or whether maybe there's a good preclinical animal model, and all of this scientific foundational work enables drug developers to better target therapies, identifies people to identify and utilize biomarkers effectively, and all of that is challenging when the scientific foundation for a program is not well defined, or for a condition is not well defined. And then lastly, design and interpretation of conditions is really challenging when the numbers are very small, especially if the effect of the drug is modest, right? It is not something that is just, the treatment effect is very large and you wake up the next day and you're vastly improved. When something has a much smaller effect, it is very difficult to detect that when you've got populations that ebb and flow differently, that progress differently, and not only that, the numbers are very, very small. So all of those things put together make it very challenging to develop drugs in rare disease.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of sum that up and maybe add to it. The number one reason why research studies in general are either not finished on time or not finished at all is because they can't find participants. This is a critical piece, is that we are, as researchers, if I have my researcher hat on, we need to be more accommodating, and we need to reduce the burden of being in our trials. Trials are often complex. We hold them in the middle of our workday. We have to have you come to our location. We can't do it at your home. We can't even connect with you because we don't know you're out there. So there's all these challenges between, as Chandra was saying, communication and connection. So again, I would encourage you to seek out trials yourself and just take that first plunge, put your toe in the water and send an email to somebody. Trials Today can help you and chaperone you through that. So if they don't pick up your email, you didn't even get connected. But just take that chance to tell somebody that you're out there and see if you're eligible. Then the other part is the burden of being in a trial. There's a lot of inclusion and exclusion criteria, like Dr. Carrie Jo was saying, because they want to isolate some variables so that they can show an effect. They can prove something statistically. So you may be saying, I have this, but why can't I be in this trial, right? Because you don't meet the criteria. So it's very complicated, unfortunately, but I would say just keep at it. See if there is a trial that you could be part of. And understand that everything we do, we get a little bit closer to making strides towards scientific development. Through this webinar alone, we're communicating to the public. And you may tell your friends that I saw this really cool webinar and I heard about these things. Thank you for being a volunteer and taking part.
Yes, I hope you do tell others in your community that you saw this really cool webinar. And so sort of piggybacking on Loretta's answer, we received a question from one registrant who has multiple autoimmune diseases, and they are wondering if they can still enter a clinical trial as someone with multiple comorbidities. And I think that is relevant to a lot of our population because it's not uncommon for a rare disease to be a comorbidity with other rare or common diseases. So my question, to sort of build upon the answer that you just gave, Loretta, is how do you recommend that someone navigate clinical trials for more than one disease at a time?
Yeah, well, we are complex human beings, aren't we? And we all, most of us have more than one health condition. So having 3 autoimmune diseases becomes very complex. What symptoms are associated with which one? What are we looking at here? A doctor will be very confused and cannot necessarily say that you're having these headaches because of this disorder and not that one. So again, scientific studies are usually well defined with inclusion criteria. They also do that so that these studies can be replicated, and they're basing them off of work that's already been done. So they can't just say, okay, we can include you. We'll make an exception here, because they'd be putting you at risk that they don't know exists. They're trying to keep you safe and isolate the variables. But that doesn't mean that they can't take somebody with 3 autoimmune diseases, but it could be difficult. You can find the list of inclusion and exclusion criteria on clinicaltrials.gov or Trials Today, but they are hard to understand. So again, have those conversations with the study team who can help to explain them to you. Don't count yourself out because you see all of this jargon and medical language on clinicaltrials.gov.
I think that's fantastic advice. And I'd like to ask everyone one final question. And this will speak more to patient organizations and advocates who are already engaged in the research space. What more can these folks do to accelerate the development of effective treatments, especially looking into the future where we might have access to more technology or where things may change? What additional efforts can patient advocates take on to accelerate the development of rare disease therapies?
Okay, I was waiting to see if anyone else would go. I'm happy to start. So I think I thought about this. As a patient advocate, as a patient advocacy organization, we always have to lead with the fact that we assume responsibility for, being on the front line of the work that we can do on behalf of our patient community every single day. with that in mind, we also have to respect that there is a process. So, you know, as we talk about the research community, as we talk about, you know, the respect for medical professionals, and also just understanding the policies and the protocols of, you know, working with the FDA and just the timeline for clinical trials and things of that nature, I think we have to respect that there is a process in place. And I always want to honor that, because when you're fighting for your quality of life, you want an answer. And you want it now, and you want a cure, and you want a solution. But I think that you cannot over communicate. There's no such thing as over communicating when you're talking about rare disease. So I think the best thing that we can do is communicate, that we educate. And again, I'm really talking about that collaboration. There is power in connection. There is power in asking for support and help. There's power in that. And so I think that those are the basic things that we can continue to do, but also setting the expectation that some things that are great take time. And that, you know, going back to what Loretta said earlier, we're humans, you know, and it's not always an easy process. And so that's why communication is so important.
I'll go next. I think just from my perspective, from the regulatory perspective, and from my perspective, I do want to emphasize the finding connections and finding partnerships. No one can do this alone, and the drug development process is so multifactorial with so many different pieces that are necessary, that I really do think taking the time to develop those relationships and learn from those who've done it before is really important. Every rare disease is unique, but the experience of sort of trying to develop a drug is not. And so I think that there's a lot of shared learning. And I think that sort of being open to participating in that could be really, really important and save you a lot of time and effort in that perspective.
Nothing to add, Amelia.
Well, thank you all for your insightful answers to these questions. I really appreciate taking the time to answer some of the questions from our audience. So we're coming to the end of our time, but I want to underscore that this will be a continuing conversation, and we look forward to hosting future conversations on this and related topics. We'll be sending the slides and recording to everyone who registered for this webinar, and you're welcome to share these with anyone who you think might find them helpful. And I want to thank our speakers for sharing their expertise and experiences with us today. I also want to acknowledge FDA and the RDCA-DAP initiative, the work being done to accelerate development of treatments for rare diseases and to advance awareness among stakeholder groups, particularly patient organizations, in how they can get involved and support research on their rare diseases. You, the participants, will be receiving a short survey about this webinar, and we encourage you to complete it. Your responses will help us develop future programs. Thank you all again for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your day.